You know, they may come from the same political party, but they certainly come at it from different directions. And that has meant a lot of the state's top two elected leaders coming at each other. And it's happened again and again in a very public way. As we've established a couple of times already this year, when the governor goes out of state, according to the Constitution of the state, the lieutenant governor takes over as the one in charge of the state. And as we've seen, when that happens, when that's happened at least the last two times, well, we have seen some fireworks, you might say. Well, guess what? Governor Brad Little left the state again this week. But the lieutenant governor, Janice McGeachin, didn't get to do things her way this time because she says she didn't know about it. And there's some discrepancy in how each of them view who has authority when the governor is out of the state or what out of the state even means. So with the latest chapter in this saga, here's Joe Paris.
The war of the words between Idaho Governor Brad Little and his Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeachin is flaring up again over a familiar issue. Who is acting governor when Idaho's governor leaves the state? Friday morning, the Lieutenant Governor's office sent out a release with the title, "Governor Little Leaves State Without Properly Notifying Lieutenant Governor." In the release, the Lieutenant Governor writes, quote, "According to the Idaho Constitution, Article 4, Section 12, and Idaho Code, Section 67-805A, the Lieutenant Governor is to serve as acting governor during the governor's absence from the state and to serve in that position until the governor returns to that state." End quote. The release finished with the quote attributed to McGeachin saying, "Did the governor fail to notify my office because he didn't want me to use my position as acting governor to once again give the power and decision-making back to the people of Idaho? Regardless of his reasons, he left the state without a governor for multiple days in direct violation of the law." Does all of this sound familiar? McGeachin made this exact same point earlier this year while Little was out of state on business. In May, she issued an executive order that banned mask mandates in Idaho. Little quickly repealed the order and said the whole thing was, quote, "an irresponsible, self-serving political stunt." The exact same situation played out again in early October when Governor Little traveled to the United States-Mexico border. As acting governor then, McGeachin again took the opportunity to issue another executive order that banned Idaho schools and universities from requiring proof of vaccine against COVID or a negative test. McGeachin also reached out to the Idaho National Guard about possibly deploying guardsmen to the Mexico border. Governor Little, while still in Texas at the border, again quickly repealed McGeachin's order, acting as governor. Now back to today. Yes, Governor Little was physically out of the state this week. He updated his social media accounts to show that he was at an event in Florida. The caption on the photo details that it was from an event with President Trump. Now, the photo was posted about an hour after McGeachin sent her release saying that she was never told he was leaving. The governor's office provided me a letter dated October 29th that explains to the lieutenant governor that per an attorney general's opinion, mere physical absence of the elected governor from the state does not invoke the portion of the Idaho Constitution that transfers gubernatorial powers from governor to lieutenant governor. The letter from Little to McGeachin goes on to say that in the event he does need her to step in as acting governor, he will let her know. Unless or until then, Little says, there is neither a need nor authorization for her to act as governor. Now, this all, again, is per an AG's opinion that was published in October on what absence from the state means in regards to the Idaho Constitution section on governor's powers. In short, the opinion says that absence from the state means effective absence, like being in surgery or being very sick, not just being physically out of Idaho. The argument being that modern technology allows the governor to lead the state effectively, something that wasn't an option when Idaho's Constitution was approved in 1890. Now, the caveat to all of this is, if the matter were to end up in court, a judge could find and rule differently on what absence from the state legally means.
And that's a big if, Joe, if it ends up in court. But this all leads to what these last couple of days lead up to another thing that happened today, and it has to do with compensation, because according to the Constitution, the lieutenant governor, when acting as governor, she gets a bump in pay.
She does, and it's fair because if the lieutenant governor is doing the governor's job, then they're compensated for serving in that chief executive role. And this is nothing new. It's listed in state code. But Brian, I want to pull up a letter here that the lieutenant governor actually wrote to the Department of Fiscal Management. And I know that the font's very small here, so I'll kind of just fill this in for you.
Take your word for it.
You take my word for it. Yeah, the lieutenant governor basically saying, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out exactly, how I get the money I'm supposed to get per state code as acting governor?
Well, I checked in with the Department of Fiscal Management, and they say it's, there's a whole process you have to go through. They have to apply, the Lieutenant Governor has to apply for getting that money, and then it has to be approved by DFM, the Department of Fiscal Management. All of this could be complicated, though, by defining when was the Lieutenant Governor acting governor. On record, DFM only has one request for, getting payment as acting governor, and that's from May 27th of this year. But it'll be interesting to see if this ends up in court, because, of course, we want to know what it means when the governor goes out of state, but also, is the lieutenant governor owed compensation for that time?
It's also interesting to note, is that necessary to be compensated for the time that you're? Well,
That's a whole other.
That's a topic for another day. All right, thank you very much, Joe.